Okay, this is part two. Now, there's some issues that we're going to talk about dealing with use of force. But before I go into use of force, I want to throw out a couple terms that maybe some of you have heard. Maybe you've not heard these terms. But when I say a pretext traffic stop, what is a pretext traffic stop? I'll never forget this. When I was actually in college getting my bachelor's degree, I was also a police officer at that time. So I had an associate's degree. I worked on law enforcement as a police officer for at least minimum of 8 years before I went back to get my bachelor's. And what I found was this. I sat in my first class, and the professor was teaching on pretext stops. And they started saying that the pretext stops is racial profiling. And I sat back and I was thinking, well, time out, hold on a second. Do you even know what a pretext stop is? So the professor, who was never a police officer, starts trying to describe what a pretext stop was. And at that point, the professor knew that I was a police officer, said, well, what do you think a pretext stop is? And I said, well, I know what a pretext stop is. We do them all the time. So I'm going to explain to you what a pretext stop is and how it differs from racial profiling so you don't get the two confused in any way whatsoever. So I'm going to give an example of a pretext stop. A lot of things that we used to do in law enforcement and still do a lot of the times is this. Let's say that we have a known drug house. People are been going to the house, they stop there for 5 minutes, jump in the car, leave, and this goes on all various different hours. Okay, say maybe a neighbor calls on it. Well, let's say the vice unit now starts sitting on that house and observing that house, and now they start getting a basis of, yup, cars are going in, they're leaving, going in, leaving, and they're going all various times for short, spontaneous times throughout the whole day and night. Okay? Now at this point, they're also obviously finding out who lives in the house. They're getting registered owners, see if there's any prior criminal history showing that those owners or whoever's living there is involved or has prior drug arrests, right? Because that helps out. And then once they get a lot of stuff figured out, at that point what they'll do is they'll usually have what we call a roller or a police car sitting outside down the block or down a few blocks away from the house that is the suspected drug house. And what will happen is the vice units will sit there and they'll see a car pull up, go in, come back out, and then start driving off. Well, what the officer will do, or the detective, I should say, the vice detective, will now follow that car as it leaves the house. And they'll start following the car and they'll tell the roller their location. And let's say that car has a defective left tail light, right? Well, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, this car has a defective left tail light. Now the roller is probably usually a canine unit, or it could just be an officer if they don't have a canine unit available in their agency. And at that point, the officer in the marked police car will quickly get to the detective's location and start following that car. Now, are they stopping that car specifically for the defective taillight, or are they stopping that vehicle using the taillight as an excuse to stop it, but they really want to do more of an investigation to see what's actually in that car, to see if that person had just purchased drugs from that house? So at that point, the officer in the marked police car will now get behind the car with that defective taillight that just left the suspected drug house. And then they follow it, light it up. Of course, they're running the plate and seeing what the registered owner of the vehicle is and doing all that stuff. Then they stop the car. Well, when the officer walks up to the car, they're going to tell him, hey, listen, you're being stopped for a defective left taillight. And the person's like, okay. And now what they're going to do is what we call a field interrogation. A field interrogation is basically starting to ask questions and see the responses given back from the driver and people inside the car. Now, it might include trying to get a consent search to that vehicle to see if there are drugs on that person or in that car. Now, at times, if they're not cooperating or just, nope, there's nothing here, whatever, at times we may take a K9 and walk the K9 around the car. Now, if the K9 actually smells the drugs and actually targets the vehicle and sits and says, yep, there's drugs in that car, that does give law enforcement enough probable cause at that point to actually do a search of that vehicle. So we have to understand the pretext stop is stopping somebody for a valid violation with the intent to investigate a crime a little bit further. So right now we're suspecting that that car just left a drug house. So, okay, what do we do now at this point? So if we get a consent search and the person has drugs on them, well, at that point, maybe we'll ask that person, well, do you want to get arrested and charged with this, or do you want to work with us a little bit and take one of our vice units in and start buying the drugs with you? Okay, that's the process, and we keep trying to get the bigger person that's selling the more and more bigger drugs, right? So We try to catch the head person that's doing it, and we just work our way from the street all the way up. So a pretext stop is stopping something for a valid violation. However, what we're trying to do is trying to figure out what is actually in that car that's criminal. And what I mean by criminal is, are there suspected drugs in that car? And that's a great thing to do a pretext stop with vice operations. So I want to get that out. Now, if I stop somebody just because of the color of their skin, that's racial profiling. Okay, that's totally wrong. And I hope none of you ever do that if you get into this career, because that is completely wrong and it's not right at all. When you target on somebody because of the color of skin, that's a no-no. You do not do that. When I say I laid my head down at night, being able to rest assured with a clear mind and clear conscience that I've always done the right thing, it's because I always did the right thing. Okay? Here's the deal, folks. If you're stopping somebody just because of the color of skin, please do not get into law enforcement at all. Because all you do is make all law enforcement look bad. So please do all law enforcement a favor and don't even get into this field because it's not worth your time and it's not worth you wrecking the whole image of law enforcement. So those are the difference. Pretext stop, I'm looking for something criminal. Racial profiling is stopping something specifically because of the color of skin, and that is wrong. Okay, everyone? So I just want to throw out those two different terms. Now, there's another term that I want to throw out as well, is what you'll see, because there's some things that come across, but you'll hear a term also called double marginality. Double marginality is when, I'm just going to say this, okay, so a black officer treats a black subject harshly on the street to try to gain respect from the white officer coworkers that they work with. So in that black person's mind, that black officer's mind, they're thinking, well, if I treat this black person really bad, then the other officers that are white are really going to respect me. And that's a messed up view. That's a messed up view. Number one, I don't care what color your skin is. If you're treating someone harshly when you shouldn't be treating them inhumane in any way, I'm sorry, I got a problem with you straight up, and I'll let you know. I'll be like, why are you being such a jerk to him? Just chill out. Because that's wrong. On the street, I'll tell you what, I treated everybody fairly. I treated them with respect because I wanted respect back. And if you're going to be an officer on the street and you want to treat people like crap, don't become an officer. Now, can you be firm in what you say to people? Absolutely. But are you going to disrespect somebody to try to get approval of somebody else? I hope not, because that's twisted and wrong. Okay, so that viewpoint of what you do, it's just wrong viewpoint, okay? And I don't care if you're a white person to do a white person, or a white person to any other race, or a black person to do a black person, Hispanic to Hispanic. I don't care whatever the race is, just treat people with respect. Treat them with respect because you want people to treat you with respect. So when we talk about different terms and stuff like that, so now you know what a pretext stop is, you know what racial profiling is, and now you understand what double marginality would be. My thing is this: treat everybody the same. Treat everybody fairly. Treat everybody with respect. And then you're not going to have any problems. Because you know what? When that body cam, when somebody comes up with a complaint against you and said, this officer said this or that, and they pull up your body cam, and they see that you're extremely respectful, that you did the right thing, that you made good choices, and you treated that person as fairly as you possibly could. Yeah, you can be firm with your voice, right? Because there is some times where you need to be firm. But there's never a time where you need to be disrespectful. There's a difference. So please, when you get in this career, if some of you are deciding to go into law enforcement, please always remember, respect everyone on the street. They're valued. Everyone has value. And never forget that every person that you deal with has value. They're a human. Okay? So now that we got those terms cleared up, we're going to look also at issues dealing with the use of force. All right, so as we talk about use of force with law enforcement, there's a court case. What we do is we call it case law. So what happens is there's law, basically there's an incident that occurs, and it goes through the legal process, and then the decision at the end of that legal process at that point, let's say something goes up to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court makes a final decision on it. Once they made this final decision as a Supreme Court, at that point, all the other courts are going to look to that decision on similar cases to make their decisions. So that's called case law. So we're going to talk a little bit about Graham versus Connor. Now, when I say Graham versus Connor, the only reason I always remember Graham versus Connor is Graham Cracker. Why do I say Graham Cracker? Because Graham versus Connor has to deal with a diabetic situation. So I think of Graham, I'm thinking Graham Cracker. Graham versus Connor, okay, has to do with a diabetic issue. Now I'm going to lay the story out for you. So basically what happens is, okay, Graham is a diabetic. Now an officer is sitting outside one of those quick stop stores, like a 7-Eleven, right? And the officer is sitting there in his patrol car just watching. Now what ends up happening is, unbeknownst to the officer, what's going on in Graham's vehicle is this. Graham's vehicle, he's with his buddy. And as they're driving, long story short, Graham feels like he's going to have a diabetic seizure and feels it coming on. And he starts freaking out and says to his buddy, hey, hustle up, go to that quick store really quick. I got to go in and get some orange juice because if I get that real quick, at that point, I know I won't go into a diabetic seizure. So he feels it coming on. He's freaking out, right? So his buddy speeds up to get there, quick drives up into the quick stop store. Graham runs in really fast. Well, he goes to get the orange juice, but there's a line behind the counter. Okay, well, first of all, if you're freaking out, you're not going to think big picture here. So Graham's not thinking, well, I'll just open it up and start drinking it while I'm waiting in line, right? So he's freaking out. So he's like, the line's too long. He lives down close to, his friend or him live down the road there. So he quick, runs back out. So he runs in. He's in there for a second. Runs back out, jumps in the car, and his buddy quick takes off, boom, runs out right out on the road and starts hauling butt. Well, anybody sitting there would be like, crap, did he just rob that store? So under Terry v. Ohio, if you have reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot based upon specific and articulable facts, you have the right to stop someone and detain them to figure out what actually is happening. That's under Terry v. Ohio. So at this point, the officer's like, the guy flew into the quick stop, runs in, he's in there for a hot moment, runs back out, and the car goes speeding out of here extremely fast. Well, would a reasonable person believe that maybe that person just robbed that store? Absolutely. Well, is the officer going to go over to the store and go, excuse me, did he just rob the store? Well, he's going to lose a suspect at that point, right? So he's got to at least stop the car and then have somebody else go check with the store to see if they just got robbed. Well, anyways, the officer goes and stops the vehicle. When he stops the vehicle, what ends up happening is Graham's starting to have that diabetic reaction, right? Well, diabetics are sometimes often confused with drunk drivers. And at that point, the tussle happens, and Graham was arrested. And anyways, he hit his head on the hood of the car because the officer didn't realize he was diabetic, and they're struggling with it. And they used force to detain him. Well, at that point, it looks at the court and they said, okay, hold on a second. Based upon all this and then Graham fighting the officers and resisting arrest, do the officers have the right to actually use force as from what they knew? So what Graham versus Connor did is they said, well, would a reasonable officer do the same thing if they were in that same position? And was the use of force justified? So basically what Graham versus Connor did is it brought a 20/20 hindsight. What would a reasonable person do under those exact same circumstances, only knowing what the officer knew at that point? Would a reasonable officer, reasonable person, make the same decision as the officer did in Graham versus Connor? So what we have to look at is this. I might know the facts of the case now. I might be like, oh, he ran in to try to get orange juice, jumped in the car, he's diabetic. Well, the officer didn't know he was diabetic. The officer didn't know he went in to get orange juice. But when he went to try to confront him to ask him questions, what happened? Well, Graham came at him, right? So the question is this. So now the officer thinks, oh, he's resistant and having a problem, so he goes to arrest him, right? Well, the question is this. He had no idea that the guy was having a diabetic reaction at that point, nor did he understand that there wasn't a robbery that just occurred because he didn't have a chance to follow up on that. So the question that comes to Graham versus Connor is basically this. What would a reasonable person do in that exact same situation? Okay? So now we got this, all right, 20/20 hindsight thing through Graham versus Connor. Now we're going to move over to deadly force. And the deadly force has to do with Tennessee versus Garner. Tennessee versus Garner. Now, I remember this court case, because I think of Tennessee and Gardner. Why a gardener? A gardener has to deal with the ground and digging, right? Well, Garner has to do with deadly force, like burying somebody, okay? So Tennessee v. Garner, Garner. Tennessee versus Garner is 1985, basically a case from there. Is what happened was 17-year-old Garner, he's unarmed and he's shot and killed by Memphis police, okay? So Memphis police officer, there was at that time a fleeing felon rule. So if somebody committed a felony and they're running from you, could you use deadly force? Well, that's what happened here, okay? So at this point, Garner's running away from Memphis Police Department and he goes to jump over a fence and the officer shoots him in the back, okay? Because he was a fleeing felon. Well, the court started looking into that and said, no. This fleeing felon rule, okay, to prevent a felon escaping, this is too broad. We got to make it more articulate. There has to be something there besides just a fleeing felon. Because think about this. Let's say I do a white-collar crime. So let's say I embezzle $100,000 from Grand Valley State University. And as I embezzle $100,000 for Grand Valley State University, I have 0 guns on me, 0 weapons, and Grand Valley Police Chief DeHaan comes in here to arrest me. And as he walks in, he says, Professor Eisenhoff, you're under arrest. At this point, I run. And as I run, now $100,000 I just stole from Grand Valley. Quick question. Is it a felony? Yes, it is. It's a felony. So if I run from Chief DeHaan and Chief DeHaan shoots me in the back, well, as a fleeing felon, is it okay for him to shoot me? That's what the courts were looking at here with Tennessee v. Gardner. You got a person who's running away from the police. Yeah, they're a felon, but they don't even have weapons, nor are they threatening any harm to the officers. So the officer shoots them. Well, they said that's wrong. And good, I'm glad they did say that was wrong, because that's messed up. So they ended up saying, okay, that fleeing felon has to be doing something that's threatening life to the officer or to another person. And that's when you can use deadly force. So if we think about that, we think to ourselves, okay, if they are threatening the life of me or somebody else, can the officer use deadly force at that time? The answer is yes. So what it did is it started bringing up the deadly force issue. So I want you to think about something. Use of force is this. So if you have a group of protesters and they're sitting on the ground in front of an entrance, let's say it's an abortion clinic, and they're sitting in front of the abortion clinic locking arms, and they're blocking the door. Well, the officers go over there, it's private property, and the owners of the abortion clinic say, we don't want these people here. So at that point, the officers are like, okay, need you to leave the premises, otherwise you'll be arrested for trespassing. All the people are cooperative, or nice, I should say, not cooperative. Officers, we understand, we're not going to leave because, our belief is we're saving lives right now, and we're not going to leave. You can arrest us. Well, if the officers take out pepper spray and spray them all right there, one, the people weren't aggressive at all towards the police. So if they're not aggressive to the police, they don't have the right to pepper spray. They don't have a right to taser. They don't have a right to kick them or anything. So maybe they use a pressure point. A pressure point would be like going in behind and using a mandibular angle, infraorbital pressure point, hypoglossal, using some kind of pressure point and just, okay, stand up. All right, just nicely. They don't have the right to hit them or anything like that, but using a pressure point is one level of force higher than what's being presented to make something happen. So let's say somebody you're going to arrest says, no, you're not going to arrest me. So you go to grab their arm and they pull it away, but they don't attack you. Okay, at that point, could you maybe grab them in kind of an armbar hold? Yeah, okay, you can get them an armbar hold at that point. But now let me ask you this. So now you go to arrest somebody, they go, no, and they pull away, and now they come to attack you. Now at that point, when they attack you, it's just my hands at this point, okay? It's just my hands, I come to attack you. Now, could I use my pepper spray? Could I use my taser? They're coming to assault me, to hurt me. Yeah, I could use my pepper spray, my taser at that point. Okay, maybe a kick or a strike that you're taught properly through defensive tactics, okay? those may be something that you can use at that point. And it also depends on the size of the subjects, right, involved. The officer's like 4'8" female weighing like 70 pounds, and this is a 300-pound defensive tackle for the New England Patriots. Okay, could that guy kill her? Yeah, so she might be able to actually use deadly force, right? Depending on the size of the subject and what's actually the totality of circumstance involving that. So I want to bring that up to the point too. But what we say is one level of force higher, and that force can go up and then it can go down. So maybe the person goes like this, sees the taser and goes, whoa, 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 no, 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 I'm not going to assault you. Well, they better not shoot the taser at that point, right? Okay, because now the person's back down and now they're listening. So that use of force can go up and it can go back down very quickly, if that makes sense. However, if somebody pulls out a knife and says, oh, I'm going to get you, and tries to assault me with that knife, or maybe try to assault somebody else with that knife, could a police officer shoot him? Yeah, they can shoot him. Why? Because that's deadly force right there. Can you kill somebody with a knife? Absolutely. But the question comes in this. Do law enforcement carry handguns? Yes, they do. So every fight they're involved in and every call that they go on, is there a gun involved? Absolutely. So let me ask you this. So let's say you have a taser and you're about to tase me with that taser. If you actually tase me with that taser, will it incapacitate me at that point? Will you be able to get my gun out at that point and kill me because you tasered me and now I'm like this and I can't move? And now you can get my gun and shoot me. The question is, you got to look at the totality of circumstances involving every single case to be able to say yes or no, that was reasonable. The question is, would a reasonable officer act and do what that officer did in that exact same circumstances at that exact same moment? So you could say, well, you can watch a video 5 times and then say, I would do it this way or that way. But the question is, you can't watch it 4 or 5 times. You can only go on it one time and you're in that moment. So the question is, what decision would you make in that moment right there? Somebody has a taser on you, they're about to shoot you with a taser. The question is, do you use deadly force or do you not use deadly force? So what we have at the end of this presentation is I'd like you to write your journals on this. At the end of this presentation, there's a YouTube link, okay? I want you to watch the video, watch the whole video, okay? Watch the facts to that case. Watch what the officer is doing. Now, some of the clips are like blocked out just because of time-wise, okay? But based upon what you see in that video, I want you to write up your journal, okay? Do you think the use of force was justified, deadly force in that case? If yes, why? If no, why? Now, when you're writing this up, be professional in the way you write. Use totality of circumstances, okay? Use of force, one level higher than what's being brought up against you. Put yourself in the officer's shoes when they use that force. Put yourself in the subject's view when you're using that force, right? Perspective. And what I want you to do is, I basically just want to know your thoughts. But when you give your thoughts, give it professionally and base it upon specific and articulable facts of what you see. Just the facts. Does that make sense, everyone? So this journal this week, when we talk about deadly force, if you think after watching this video, yeah, you know what? I think it was justified. Explain to me why, but do it professionally. And if you don't think so, explain it professionally, because I want to hear your thoughts. Ask me what mine is, what my answer is with this. I'm not going to tell you, because I want your thoughts to be your thoughts. Some of you are like, oh, he might say yes right away. He may say no right away. Here's the deal. I'm not going to let you know, because I want you to be the judge and jury right now. I want you to watch it. I want to hear your perspective, but don't base your perspective on opinion, base it on fact and opinion. So give me your facts first as to why yes or no, if that makes sense. Okay? So facts, yes I do, no I don't. Give me the facts as to why. So justify to me your opinion. Okay, everybody? Well, thanks for watching. I hope you have an amazing week. Hopefully this COVID thing ends very quickly here, maybe at the end of this year. Maybe we can get things back to normal. And other than that, everybody have a great week, and we'll catch you a little bit later. See ya.